Meeting feature recording has started. This meeting is now being recorded.
Thought about that always. Good morning, everyone. I call this meeting to order. I'm Jason Dean, the chairman of the Mississippi Board of Education, currently present at Central High School Building, 359 Northwest Street, Jackson, Mississippi, 39201. The meeting of the Board of Education is being held today, Thursday, August 23rd, 2018.
I'm sorry.
Morning.
Dr. Dean, have you taken roll?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. I'm just calling the meeting to order and reading the appropriate intro here. The notice of this meeting included the date, time, place, and purpose of the meeting and identified the location of the meeting available to the public. An audio recording is being made of this meeting and minutes of this meeting will be recorded. Dr. Carrie Wright is present at Central High School Building, 359 Northwest Street, Jackson, Mississippi, 39201 to participate in this teleconference meeting. So now to establish quorum, I will call the names of the board members and please state your location and your presence for this meeting. Miss Rosemary Altman.
I'm present at 359 Northwest Street, Jackson, Mississippi, 39201.
Buddy Bailey.
Present, Central High Building, Jackson, Mississippi.
Dr. Karen Elam.
Going on I-40 in the state.
Okay. Mr. Franklin.
Present, Central High Building, Jackson.
Kelly.
I'm at City Hall, Gulfport, Mississippi, 2309 15th Street, downtown Gulfport.
Charles McClellan.
5880 Gulf Commerce Plaza, Jackson, Mississippi.
Miss Brittany Wright.
I am at home with the flu at 107 North Sixth Drive, Starkville, Mississippi.
Oh no, we hope you get well soon. And Mr. Sean Suggs, who we believe was on an aircraft and not able to join us, so we know that he won't be here. So a quorum of the board is present at the location stated for the purpose of conducted this meeting through a teleconference means. The August 23rd, 2018 special call board meeting is now being called to order at 10:04 a.m. Since this is a teleconference meeting, please identify yourself when asking questions, making comments, or making motions. At this point, I will turn it over to Dr. Wright for remarks from the State Superintendent of Education. Okay, so if you see board members in front of you, there's one agenda item per the special call. We need to move for an approval of the agenda, and I'll just make a note. Typically, we ask for any additions or deletions or amendments at this point, but because it's a special call meeting and following public notice rules, there is no room for that. We would have to have another meeting if you do that. So with that, I'll ask for someone to make a motion to approve the current agenda.
Second.
All in and also I'll make a note. Typically in teleconference meetings, you would have to do a roll call for everyone, yes, no, as you go through, but recent changes in state law has allowed these meetings to just to say all in favor. So we won't do the traditional roll call. And if anybody has an issue with that, we can go back to that process, but I think it will make the meeting more efficient. So we have a motion and a second to vote to approve the agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposition, hearing none. We have an approval of the agenda. And with that, then I will turn it over to Dr. Vanderford for the discussion of our one board item.
Today, we're asking the board to and
move that closer. Thank you.
I apologize. So today, we're asking the board to grant approval of the temporary rule and to begin the APA process to revise the business rules of the Mississippi statewide accountability system, specifically the business rule related to the assignment of grade classifications for schools with grade 12. The PowerPoint that you have provided today is very similar to the presentation that you received last week. However, I'll draw your attention on the background information to slide 6. So as you recall, on August the 16th, the State Board remanded the decision back to the Commission on School Accreditation for further deliberation. The following day, on August the 17th, we provided all the members of the Commission with the backup material that was presented to the state board last week regarding the MAP assessment data. So we provided the overview of the 3 years of assessment data as presented to the board last week, as well as the additional materials that you received regarding the assignment of grades for districts, schools with a grade 12, and the elementary and middle schools. So the commission met yesterday on August 22nd in a special called meeting, and they unanimously affirmed its August 14th, 2018 decision to reset the baseline for schools with grade 12, effective for school year 17-18, in accordance with the State Board of Education policy with the percentiles that are currently approved. At this time, I'm going to ask that Mr. Bureau walk through the presentation, the rationale, and just give you a brief overview of the rationale for reestablishing the cuts regarding the schools with grade 12.
Franklin?
They're asking us today to approve, I don't remember what the term is, so that this goes into effect immediately without the APA process?
No, sir. We will have the APA process. What we're asking is that you grant us permission to file a temporary rule, which becomes effective immediately in accordance with state law. And the rationale is on the last paragraph of your board item. I think that there's a section of the law, if it confers a benefit or removes a restriction to members of the public, that temporary rule can be granted and effective immediately as we work through the APA process. So upon your approval, if granted today, we will file with the Secretary of State the temporary rule and the proposed rule. It will be required that it be in the public for 25 days for public comment, and the calendar will allow us to have that 25 days met prior to coming back to the board in September asking for the final rule following the APA process.
So following the 25-day APA, we could come back in September and change our minds? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That is what you're asking us today, to grant immediate approval on something this significant and this important.
That's correct. We're asking for
the APA process, which we normally follow the APA process so we can have input from the practitioners.
That's correct, and we will continue to follow the APA process in accordance with law, and we will provide you all those public comments at your September 2018 meeting, and at that time we would ask for it to be final approval.
Okay, so I'm going to walk back through the information that was provided to the board on August the 16th, and just questions that the board might have. So we start with the information that was provided to the Technical Advisory Committee. When we met with the Technical Advisory Committee,
just a little bit closer. Remember, this is being live streamed. Right.
When we met
can the speakers identify themselves, please?
Yes, so this is Alan Burrow. I'm the Director of District and School Performance.
Thank you, Alan.
So when we met with the Technical Advisory Committee, we presented all of the preliminary results. Again, these are all preliminary results of the accountability system. We looked at all three scales and the distribution of grade assignments on each scale. So when we looked at 1,000-point schools, we saw a problem with the results and the distribution because the distribution of grade assignments did not match the assessment results that we were seeing. There was an overall increase in proficiency in the assessments for high schools. However, we saw a significant decrease in the distribution of grade assignments for high schools or 1,000-point schools. And that's reflected in the current table. We had a movement of from 50 A's to 7 A's and 4 F's to 60 F's. So when we go and look at the data, like I had mentioned, assessment data is generally trending upward. We would expect that the growth rates, the observed growth rates would be consistent with prior year, and they were not. And that's reflected here in this graph. So we can see that growth in the blue bar from 2016 was growth measured from MCT2 to Park primarily. Yes, sir.
For the 2016, was that from Park results or MAP results?
Yes, so 2016 was a measurement of growth from MCT2 to Park primarily because of bank scores in the high schools.
We administered the Park in the spring of 16.
Spring of 16 would have been MAP.
Third year of MAP.
This was our third year of MAP. So in 2017, the orange bar that you see up there, that is growth measured from Park to MAP primarily in high schools. And then this year, primary measurement of growth is MAP to MAP. So we don't see comparability between those 3 different years in our growth calculations. And so what we're seeing is different expectations for growth based on different assessments. And when we set the baseline, we're establishing the expectations. What do we expect the high schools to do in comparison to one another? What is an average rate of growth for high schools? And you see the significant difference here that is not consistent with assessment results. So we saw that our problem was growth. Yes, sir.
Okay. Last week when I asked the question about, does the growth factor prove to be more difficult for our higher performing schools to continue growth? And you said, no, you had built-ins in the model to, why didn't the built-ins in the model take care of this situation?
Well, because the difference in the 3 years was the way in which growth was calculated. We're looking at basically when we're measuring growth, we're looking at the prior year score and the current year score, and then we're measuring growth from those two. And because the prior year score was on a different assessment, we're seeing different growth results than what we expect to see measuring MAP to MAP. So it didn't necessarily align itself with higher performing schools or lower performing schools, but rather it was a different baseline year in the assessment results when we're measuring growth. So it would be an inconsistent measure of growth across these 3 years. We can't compare 2018 to 2017 to 2016 because of the different assessments that were used.
Even with the built-ins in the model and the whole thing? Because you just said that it was about methodology of computing growth as opposed to the different assessments.
Well, I kind of see that as 2 different issues. The methodology of calculating growth does include provisions for higher performing schools that we talked about before, the fact that a student who scores proficient gets growth as long as they maintain proficiency and they don't regress. Whereas this is more of the input into the methodology. It's the assessments that are different, resulting in a different growth result.
Growth mechanism creating exaggerated growth at some point in time?
Not the methodology, but again, the input. So if you were trying to compare the expectation for this year in growth, MAP to MAP, to last year, you would see that there is an exaggerated growth, to use your term, last year. In other words, the expected average growth measuring Park to MAP would be higher than the expected average growth measuring MAP to MAP.
I think that may answer Mr. Franklin's question in that it was, if you do have that, I'm using the term exaggerated growth, it's hard to repeat 2 years in a row at that magnitude.
Let me ask a question that I was going to ask later. May I?
Yeah, just one thing. Whenever you direct questions, please state your name for the people.
And that was Buddy Bailey.
Johnny Franklin. All right. If we hadn't changed the cut scores last year, would this be a moot issue this year? Well, I mean, you're saying you can't compare. I mean, growth was MAP to MAP last year. and we can't change cut scores. It's map to map this year, and you're saying what's throwing it out is back in 15, 15 when we used part, that's throwing it all out of kilter.
So our problem is the lack of stability that we've had in the system over the past few years. That's a result of having 3 assessments over the course of 3 years and continuing to calculate growth while trying to compare assessments that are not similar.
Okay, now what are we going to do next year when we change assessments again for this districts with a 12th grade school? Because we got scheduled changes in assessment for the next couple of years, right?
That's correct. We'll have a new science assessment, which is a
biology.
Biology 1 science assessment. That's 50 points of a 1,000-point scale.
Still changing an assessment. So are we going to be asked to come back and look at resetting because we're changing assessments again? I mean, when does it ever stop? Because we've got assessment changes out into the future, you know.
Wouldn't expect as significant of a change here, primarily because growth accounts for such a high percentage of the score in schools in our accountability system, and we don't measure growth for science. It's just proficiency. And in the high schools, in specific, in the high schools, it's 50 points. So we wouldn't necessarily see such a big difference like we're seeing here in the growth, because this affects all growth category in the growth of the lowest quartile.
ELL component too. Are we looking at some, because the ratings came out and it gave you with ELL and without ELL, and some of those schools that had an in count did drop I'm gonna say 12 to 18 points based on ELL. And of course, we'll get better at that as we always do. But again, to go along with the science, whatever that drop is, and I would say it would be some drop, maybe not to the degree that algebra was, but some drop along with the ELL component for those that have in counts, then there is that possibility of a reset. And in light of that, I think one of the things that we talked, again, this is Buddy Bailey. I'm sorry I didn't identify myself, guys. One of the things that I know we looked at and talked a little bit about the other day is 700-point scales, and we've allowed it, and I agree with it, transition into as many as 20% A's, and because of the growth factors and performance, we expect, like you said, growth components to show themselves. The problem with high schools is anytime, according to what Paula said is board policy, that we have to go by the 90th percentile. So every time we reset a cut score, we have to reset it at that. So every time we reset this, then it has to go back. So all those high schools that may have progressed into an A are going to be pulled back, and we got to go with 10%. I give an example. If we did that if you went to elementaries right now and just said, guys, we got to go by the 90th percentile route, then we're going to drag 10% of those A's in elementary back to B's. Well, I think that's what's happening in high schools kind of year in, year out. And every time we reset whatever performance level we've moved into the next category, we drag them back and say, no, we got to go 10%. Now, guys, hear me right. I know we got to have a flexible mechanism in there to account for 3 tests that we went through and some of these other things that are happening. But I just want to be able to show a progression of high schools and that be a true reflection. And right now, those that have been improved and moved to A's may be drugged back, not only this year, but next year on another reset. So just a concern out there, guys. There's no perfect model. I get that. And we're having to pick apart some of the details just to make sure we got it as close as we possibly can. No, that's my purpose in this thing, not to undo a model and turn it upside down, because they're very, very complex. But at the same time, it's our job to perfect it as much as we can, and therein lies the comments and questions that are being put forth. So just the noise within that model make it discouraging in some ways, and just want to note that.
Connie Franklin, but Buddy, all 3 of y'all, okay. when you talk about the 90th percent, that was like, what, if I understood it right, what we did was we took everybody and ranked them from the top to the bottom. And then we set the cut was at, the cut score for an A was at the 90th percentile based on that, which did not mean that only 10% of the districts in this state could be A's, right? You could have 50 A's or 40 A's or 3 A's, right? But that's where the cut score was, right?
Yes.
Is that what we're trying to do again?
Well, yes, we're trying to establish a baseline with the intent that it would stay the same moving forward and your distribution would shift upwards with performance. I'm
going to go back again, and when we get on a few pages deeper, I want to ask you again, what would have happened, or what would this all have looked like if we had not changed? And I know we let everybody, we bailed everybody out by saying take the better last year. But if we hadn't messed with the cut scores last year, had kept them like they were in 16, what would it look like this year? If y'all got a slide with that, I think I got it in here. I'm looking at the
slide. It's not in your presentation today. If I recall, it was in your presentation last week.
What's the difference in here when I'm looking at what you gave us the other day, Paul. When you say 2017 official, what does that mean?
That means that was the grade that was assigned to the district or school based on the better of the two grades, because when we assigned grades last year, we ran the data, and then we allowed districts to apply the previous year's cut from 16 or the reestablished cut from 17. And elementary schools, or the 700-point scale, the 1,000-point scale, and districts had the option of receiving the higher of the two grade as their official grade.
So the 2017 official was not what would have been their assignment based upon the cut score.
That's correct. If a district or school had an assignment that was higher than the one based on the cuts. And that was a result of us adding at the state board level approval to give the district that option. So it was a modification of the state board policy for the standard setting process, or to establish the cuts.
If I'm seeing right on page 8 of this document that I'm looking at, if we take the 2017 official that you just described as being the higher of whatever what the district chose, and compare that to where we are today with the preliminary, there's not a lot of difference on district results.
That's correct.
15 A's, 14. 9 F's, 25 F's. Big difference there. But if you go down the line, in B's from 43 to 38, C 43, 41, D 36, 28. And this 2018 preliminary is based on last year's cut score.
That's correct. Based on the current cuts that are board approved, which were established last year.
Thank you.
Okay, so what we have on the slide now is a table showing what you were just discussing, the number of or the distribution of grade cuts or grade labels, excuse me, in the official 2017 results. What they would be if we did not change anything this year is the preliminary 2018 based on current cuts, and then the green columns are with a reset. And this is a graphical representation of what was just in that table.
Yeah, I'll point out another thing, please, while you're showing that. Back up to the other slide. Mm-hmm. If you look on page 10 here, this is referring to districts, and you're talking about just the schools with a 12th grade. We look at the district cut scores. The 90th percentile was 668 in 17, reset scores in 18, 667. That is, if we reset them, then it'll be back to pretty much like they were.
On the districts. So therefore, there's not a recommendation to re-establish the cuts at the districts. It's only the schools with grade 12.
Okay, and this slide was not shown to you on August the 16th, but we added it because there was some question about the movement, so we wanted to show you what it would look like. This is the count associated with movements from one grade assignment to the next based on the current cuts versus resetting the cuts. So for example, you would see the second row from the bottom movement of high schools from an F to a D. There would be a count of 27 high schools that moved from an F to a D.
Question on page 11, where we dealt with just the element of the 700-point schools in his handout.
So you're referring, just for the board member, the slide numbers that he's given is from the PowerPoint presentation that was provided last week at the board meeting.
Look at the 2017 official versus 2018 preliminary. This is for elementary schools.
That's correct.
We went from 64 A schools to 145. Okay, B's we went from 174 to 171. C's 158 to 136. D's 151 to 108. F's 89 to 75. But that wasn't a significant enough change to look at changing the cut scores for those districts, those schools.
No, and again, the 2018 preliminary is just a prediction based on the impact data that we used to calculate these results at the time.
Numbers are really based on the 17 cut scores.
That's right. That's continuing the 17 cut and looking at the 2018 assessment data and the gains that we made in proficiency across all the assessed areas at the various grade levels. And this is the outcome in the accountability, and so it's what you would have predicted as an outcome based on the results of the assessments. And so therefore there was no recommendation to reestablish those cuts.
Now, would you go back and do the comparison between the slide you were just on and the previous slide where the D's, that shows the number of movements in there from D to F, and try to explain that a little bit. For example, I see with a D there 59 to 56, that looks like 3 in a movement because that's supposedly in count. And then 55 to 60. Again, this is Buddy Bailey. So I'm a little bit confused on how that.
Sorry to interrupt. You guys on the phone, do you mind hitting mute? There's some background noise that we're picking up at the board. Okay.
Okay, so here this table shows the total counts for each grade assignment. And when you're looking at, for example, in that D column, going from the red to the green, you see only a difference of 3 in there. And that doesn't necessarily mean that only 3 schools changed grade assignments. It just means that that's the total count in that distribution for that grade level, or that grade label, excuse me. And in this table, we're looking at all 2018 accountability results, preliminary accountability results, and we're just saying what is the count of schools that move from one grade label to the next if we change the baseline this year.
It's grade 12 schools?
All schools? This is all grade 12. Grade 12, it's all 2018 data. It's just the difference is the baseline where it was established last year to the baseline being reset this year. And then we're giving a count of how many schools move from one grade label to the other. This is based on so the first grade label you see is the 2017 cut scores, and the second grade label that you see there is the reset 2018 cut scores. That's correct. That's correct. So we're just
we're moving F to D's by 27.
That would be correct. Yes.
F to F is staying the same at 33.
There would be 33 schools that are currently in F, and they would stay in F.
We have a slide that shows what it would be if we don't change a cut score. Am I overlooking something?
No, that's right here. So that's the red columns. Yeah. So we would have 60 Fs if we don't change anything, and 33 if we reset it. And so then what we're seeing here is you'll see 27 of them went from F to D, so that's that difference. And this table just shows, based on preliminary data, what the reset cut scores would look like. So there's a decrease in each grade level assignment. So this doesn't have a negative impact on a school, which is different than what we were dealing with last year with the baseline resets. There were some schools that benefited and some that did not, and that was the reason for the better of the two grade. In this case, we don't have that scenario. This is a decrease.
Y'all discuss doing the same thing this year that we did last year, holding folks harmless by letting them pick between?
Yes, we did discuss that with the TAC, and of course the TAC's response by us modifying the established state board approved policy last year, that we actually contributed to the instability that was in the system. And so the recommendation to avoid doing that is to, if you approve the reset of the cuts, to approve that reset in accordance with state board policy without any modifications, because what we're trying to establish with this is comparability without any influences in the system. And again, we, back to, we were talking about those numbers. We had a great deal of conversation with the commission yesterday. The reset of scores is not about the number of A's, the number of B's, or even F's that we'll have. The purpose and the rationale behind the recommendation to reset is, now that we have at the high school level the ability to compare growth between assessments that are the same assessment, with having a map-to-map comparability. I mean, that is the bottom line for the rationale. It's not about the numbers, who's an A or who's an F. It's about having a model that represents the actual performance, student performance on these assessments in the classroom.
I hear you say it. Did I hear correctly that you said the TAC said because of us getting involved and making changes last year that we help contribute to the instability this year?
It did contribute to the instability of the system, because when you go back and you look at the official grades that were assigned for 2017, that's not an accurate reflection of the performance of what the outcome of the accountability system was.
Who made the recommendation that we changed last year?
The board.
TAC didn't have
the TAC. Well, right. The recommendation to reestablish the baseline went through the process from the Accountability Task Force to the Technical Advisory Committee to the Commission on School Accreditation to the board and on through the APA process. As it should have been.
Recommendation to the board to let them hold them harmless came from where?
That was the board's decision to do that.
But who did the recommendation to the board come from?
It came from us. I mean, I'll be honest about that. It came from the department.
Yeah.
It came
to give the higher.
Absolutely, because all of this data was coming in so late, and I personally did not feel it was fair to districts and schools with that late date to say, too bad, so sad. The data are what the data are, and you're getting the lower of the scores. And I did not feel that was fair to the field. So I said, this is a time that I think we need to give them the option, and that's the reason that we brought forward the recommendation that we did to the board. I'll own that.
Okay, well, that was the end of that presentation. So do we have any more questions?
Up and ask this question. It talked about, it was a background and timeline. It said the TAC on August the 9th reviewed the preliminary data. What prompted them to review it?
It's the process. I mean, that's our standard practice. I mean, annually, the TAC is experts, national experts related to assessment and accountability, and all throughout the course of a year, when the Technical Advisory Committee meets, our agenda consists of the appropriate reviews of assessment and accountability results. So their fall meeting that's always held in August, they see our annual assessment results for the fall and the spring of that current school year, as well as accountability predictions. So standard practice.
That was all that prompted their review. It didn't have anything to do with a meeting that was held on the coast in July?
No, actually, we knew this time last year when TAC met in August and the recommendation was made to reestablish the cuts last year, we knew that because we were not comparing map-to-map data with schools with grade 12, but we were in elementary schools, that we were going to be back at the table having this, or it was predicted that we would be back at the table having this conversation this time this year. So
you're saying last year when we discussed that we were told that probably we would have to have this kind of discussion again.
Right, correct. I stated that.
It's on record. Yeah.
Yes, I stated
I didn't
that.
remember that.
Yep.
Along those same lines, we're also saying with the income and science test that we probably will have to have this conversation again. With income and EL impact, we're probably going to have this conversation again. I think the point is we don't need to mischaracterize this as us acting arbitrarily, that there are external variables impacting the reset here. It's the flushing out part. So we're simply comparing map to map, which to the point about not changing it again, I think this is the last year we'll ever have to point to different accountability tests as the rationale for changing the cut scores. I don't want to hear that next year for sure, because that's map and map and map and map for here and forever. Okay, but if there are other external variables that come, I think the board needs to acknowledge, the impact on practitioners and, recognize quantitatively how that impacts the scores, which I think is an open question from here on out.
And Paul, there's been much conversation about the percentiles and distributions and matching those percentiles in the 90th down to the 63rd, 38th. Just so we make sure we got that tied together, because I've heard from commission that, listen, because this state board policy, we have to do it this way from the percentile. But if you go to 10/19/2016, the percentiles are in the business rules. But then you get to 11/29/17, and it goes with straight cut scores. So obviously there's something that ties those together that I'm not seeing. And then in 18, of course, it goes straight to cut scores. Percentiles are not mentioned in there anymore. So what something obviously ties those together.
So that's correct. So at the time on the document that you have, when it was released for the APA process, we did not know what those cuts were at the time. So when it's released for APA today, your section with schools with grade 12, those current cut scores that are in the 2018 accountability for that section of schools will have a strike through, and those percentiles will be put in, because until the final accountability results are calculated and we know exactly how many points each school has earned, we will not be able to establish that cut point. So that, again, the APA process today will show the percentile in accordance with policy, and that cut cannot be determined. And that's why all your backup material, where we have an asterisk by the cut, it says the actual cuts will be determined with the final result. So right now, if you're seeing like the 90th percentile for 1,000-point schools is predicted to be 748, and for the 14th percentile at 506, that is subject to change based on the appeals process that we're currently going through with the districts. And so that's why we cannot put 748 in the document that will go out for APA process.
I say that to prevent confusion, because anybody that goes to business rules and pulls that right there, they're going to see a cut score, and it's not going to have anything about a percentile on there, and they're going to say, oh yes, you can change cut scores, because it's not tied to that. And
so again, that process would be, it will be marked the 90th percentile for the APA process, and then when we come back to the board for final approval in September, and that actual cut is established and it is 748, then we'll revise the accountability document and post it online back with the cut score in the place of the 90th percentile, because we will actually know what cut is the 90th percentile.
Okay, thank you.
The questions? Anybody on the phone? Dr. Kelly, Dr. Elam?
Nope.
All right, hearing no question.
One comment, Dr. Dean. Let me say a special thank you to Dr. Wright and Paul and her team for going back through this again. We remanded it back to commission. A special thank you to the commission for going back and wrestling with it again. I think that everybody worked all the time to get it done, and it's in the first presentation with Paul and her team coming forward, they worked 24 hours a day to get it done, and then it landed.
I'm not active to the right.
This is Buddy Bailey. And then it landed just in a hurry with commission, and they didn't have quite the time. And so a special thank you to all you who went back through that, gave us a little more time to look at it. Obviously, it's come out of commission unanimous, and that can't be looked at lightly. So I just want to acknowledge that, say a thank you to you guys for doing that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments before we move for the motion? Okay. Under the Office of Chief Accountability Officer, do I have a motion to approve item 1?
Rosemary Altman, so moved.
Before, do we have a second on the motion?
This is John Kelly. I'll second the motion.
So the motion we're voting on is approval of temporary rule to begin the APA process to revise business rules of the Mississippi Statewide Accountability System to reset the baseline scores for schools with grade 12 effective for school year 2017 through 2018. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 No.
So I want to make sure I do this properly. On the phone, we had Dr. Elam, Dr. Kelly, and Ms. Rye all voted. Mrs. Rye all voting affirmative, and
Yes.
there's a bit of a lag there, so I wanted to affirm that. And then all opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, please state your name.
Charles McClellan, no.
Okay.
Johnny Franklin, no.
Motion based on vote, motion carries. With that, I think that concludes official business on the agenda. I've asked Pete if he will do a quick update. We're in a special session with the legislature, and I just asked him if there's anything related whatsoever to education. Obviously, the focus on infrastructure, but there's a state lottery issue, and any insight into whether or not those funds would be directed. I've just kind of off script here a little bit. I asked Pete Smith. He's about to just give us a quick lowdown on the legislature, which just gavelled in 45 minutes ago.
Correct. No. So as everyone know, they're meeting to discuss potential resources coming in for roads and bridges primarily. There's a lot of there's several ways to get those resources. One from the online or from the betting, sports betting that was just recently approved by the Supreme Court. The other is as the lottery is going to be added, or has been added to the call, so they'll discuss that. And then I think a couple other sources. I think one of the big issues was in the beginning before they came together was deciding on if there would be specified funds going to a specific area. And I think that's something that they're still kind of discussing, because normally legislature doesn't assign funds to a specific category. They like to get the money into the general fund and then appropriate it from there. So I text one of my buddies over there today and asked him if there's anything education-wise that could be added to the call, and I got a very affirmative no. So
that happens to change. Just keep us informed.
Will do.
Okay. With that, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Is that Dr. Kelly?
Yeah, John Kelly. Question for Pete. Is the BP distribution of BP oil funds, is that still on, or did they bump that off?
No, at last I heard, I think it's still on.
Okay, thank you.
Alrighty. So with that, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 We stand adjourned.